I'm Dr. Joanne Unger, and I'm a clinical psychologist. Childhood anxiety is experiences of worry and sometimes avoidance of feared situations that are above and beyond what other kids their age might be experiencing. So some of the symptoms and signs parents may see in children with anxiety are complaining of an upset stomach, feeling not well. They may avoid wanting to go to certain places and do certain things. Some children may express their anxiety in hyperactivity, so they may be bouncing around the room, or they may even experience temper tantrums. Their anxiety may come out in that form as well. 4 of the most common types of anxiety in childhood are separation anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and school refusal. If left untreated, childhood anxiety can also affect social relationships, the ability to develop meaningful relationships in adulthood. It can also affect their mental health. They may experience adult symptoms of anxiety. They may experience difficulties with mood related to how they feel about themselves. For those helping anxious kids, it can be very worrisome to watch a child struggle with anxiety. Thankfully, there's lots that we can do to help kids work through their anxiety, overcome their anxiety, and manage it so that they're able to do the things that they want to do in life. One of the first steps in helping a child cope with their anxiety is an acceptance that there is an anxiety problem. This can be really difficult for people who work with children because it's hard to watch kids struggle, and we want them to be successful and we want them to engage in life. But we need to do that at their pace. So the first step is just to understand what they might be experiencing, what the feelings they may be having, and empathize with that. Once you've noticed that a child is struggling with anxiety, and you've come to accept that this is part of who they are, the next step is looking at and observing how that anxiety is expressed. So paying attention to what they're doing, the words they're saying, what situations the anxiety is coming up. What we want to be looking for is patterns in their behavior. Are there certain things or triggers that are common in their expression of their anxiety?
Well, in children, more so than older adolescents or adults, we see a lot of physical signs of anxiety and behavioral signs, and less ability to articulate what's going on inside, to say what it is that's the matter. So one of the leading signs of anxiety, one of the leading reasons for referrals from pediatricians, for example, is children with stomach aches for which there's no physiological cause that can be found. So stomach aches and headaches are the physical kinds of symptoms children have, as well as restlessness in some kids, sometimes mistaken for signs of something like hyperactivity and ADHD. You also see other children become withdrawn. Avoidance is the key behavioral sign of anxiety, be it avoidance from general social situations or refusal to do specific tasks like go to school or try swimming lessons.
Once an adult has identified a pattern of anxiety for a child, the next step is looking at how to help the child face those fears. Children may experience their anxiety as something that's very wrong with them, or feel bad about that or about themselves. So it's very important to have a cheerleading approach or a coach approach in working with child to help them feel good about themselves and to help them feel encouraged about each step that they make towards facing their fears.
It's also important to control your own emotion. Sometimes parents are tempted to try to get through situations by using a really loud voice or threatening or forcing or those kind of situations, and often that really just escalates anxiety. So when you see the pattern for your child, the next step is to help your child to face their fears a step at a time. And often it starts out with very easy activities. It might be discussing ahead of time what you're going to do, or reading about something you're afraid of in a book. For example, reading books about dogs or insects if those are a problem. When that's going well, then you might get into doing videos about it. And then when that's going well, you start to get into short periods of doing the activity. For example, a child who's afraid of dogs, after they've read about them and watched them on YouTube, then we might go to a pet store and just watch the dogs. we might be observing the dogs from a place where your child is a little bit challenged but not too uncomfortable. And so if you go in small steps regularly and repeatedly, you can overcome almost any fear.
Well, I think that the most important thing for parents to do is to help their children face their fears on a regular basis, step by step. And each day that we face our fear, no matter how small the step is, if it's a baby step, such as, I'm really afraid of swimming lessons, so today we just went to the pool and we didn't even go into a bathing suit, we sat in the cafeteria. That's a step. And that's much better than saying, okay, you don't have to, or forget it, which is what a lot of us say when we're just frustrated and we have a lot of commitments and we're just too taxed to push. But the more we push, the more we're doing our children a service. After being inside the physical building, perhaps the next week, and if a parent has the wherewithal that their child's already expressed a lot of anxiety about swimming lessons, they can start this process long before the lessons actually start. Next, we're going to go into our bathing suit and we're going to put our feet in the water. And what I like to do is I like to say, and we're just going to do that. Don't do anything more, because sometimes kids will get there and after their feet are in the water for 10 or 15 minutes, they'll decide that they want to jump in. And I like them to have the perception that they've done more than they even had to, rather than they couldn't do the step. And I mentioned 10 to 15 minutes, that's really important. The way that our bodies have evolved in our inner fear response is that we have an adrenaline rush. We feel like we're on fire for about 10 or 15 minutes when we face something that we really, really fear. But that adrenaline rush always subsides. So if we stay in the face of that which we fear, say a swimming pool, for at least 15 minutes, we will automatically, without doing any other coping behaviors, without having to talk about it, without having to do relaxed breathing, just by physically being there, we're going to get used to being in the swimming pool. We're going to get used to that heavy chlorine smell. And then we would go on, and perhaps the next step is to go into the water with a trusted adult like your parent with, say, a life jacket on. If in swimming lessons you weren't allowed to wear life jackets at that stage. And we're just going to splash around in the water and have fun. And again, being there for 15 minutes is really all it can take. Staying for longer is optional. The more exposures we do, and the closer in time that they are to each other, the better. So doing an exposure a week for 10 weeks is great, and will probably get any of us over our particular fears. But doing 10 of them or even 5 of them over 2 or 3 days is even more likely to be successful, because our body and our brains are having less time in between exposures to get back into the old patterns, and we're habituating or getting used to the scary thing very quickly.
Another important step in helping children overcome their fears is to help them think about their worries and their fears in a more realistic way. Because of children's lack of experience in the world, and sometimes their exposure to lots of media about bad things that happen in the world, they can have an unrealistic expectation of those bad things happening in their lives.
Complementary to that is how to work on the worry or the thought part of anxiety. And what works with that area very well is to make sure your child has a realistic understanding of the situation. To give you an example of a fear of tornadoes, tornadoes can be incredibly destructive, but if you ask your child to start asking family and friends, they'll probably be able to ask every relative and friend they can find, and none of them will even have seen a tornado in their whole life, including grandfather who's 75 years old. So that helps the child put the problem in perspective. If they're asking for reassurance repeatedly, you probably best to stop giving reassurance and shift instead to problem solving, where you might say something like, well, tornadoes are very, very rare, but they're not impossible. I've never had experienced a tornado as a parent, but if one does come, I hear it, the sound is like a huge roar, like a train coming. What's the thing that we do in our house when we start to hear that big roar? And you practice with them what to do when a tornado comes. So the family might do well to have a drill where they practice all running down into the basement, going under the basement stairs, and just sitting there till the noise passes. when you're learning anything as a child, it's better to practice not once, but quite a few times to really make sure the learning gets firmed up before you move on to the next thing.
When helping children talk about their fears and talk about how they can cope with their fears, have children generate some of those solutions themselves. For example, if a child is nervous about changing at school and they know gym class is coming, one way to help them is to sit down with them and talk about what they might be feeling, what their thoughts are about the situation, and what are some possible ideas they have about solving the problem themselves. Kids will often generate a lot of really good ideas that will feel good to them, and it will give them that sense of control and that sense of self-efficacy that they can handle problems in the future. Children with anxiety often use reassurance as a way to help them calm themselves. However, reassurance seeking with adults in their life can actually make the anxiety worse. Try to cut back on the amount of reassurance they're giving their kids and put that back onto their children in terms of using some of their problem-solving skills or other ways that they can learn to calm themselves. In encouraging children to use their brave behaviors or to try new things is by using rewards. Some of the best rewards are time with the parent, special activities that they like to do, and things that are fun.
In thinking about schools and teachers, the schools are very positive and favorable environments for kids with anxiety. Most teachers every year will have 2 or 3 children in their class who have significant problems with anxiety, so most teachers are quite familiar with many of the anxiety situations that come up, and they'll have a lot of good strategies through their past experience and often through their own experience as parents. When teachers run into a problem they're not familiar with, they also have specialists to draw on that come to every school. For example, most schools have access to school psychology services, and they can consult with that person about what's best. The key principles we work with in talking to teachers is the principle of facing your fear in small steps repeatedly and a step at a time. And very often teachers are able to work out a strategy for that. Teachers in schools are very good about teaching problem-solving skills, which are very, very important to kids in overcoming anxiety. And finally, the school is a great place to develop social skills. Children who have social anxiety, often there's many things that happen in schools that just help them to naturally move along and build their skills and build their confidence. If a teacher notices that 1 or 2 of the children in their class are really avoiding a lot of situations like playing with others at recess or something like that, it'd be very good for them to sit down with the other school staff and plan out a strategy to deal with this. Common strategies that work out really well often are pairing a youngster up with a buddy who will take them under their arm a little bit and help them engage in activities, creating some simple reward system for approaching rather than avoiding other kids, and pairing up ones that are particularly shy and quiet with other kids who are very positive and supportive. Another issue that's becoming very big, and it relates to social anxiety in particular, is the issue of screen time. Children have many, many more opportunities than they used to have for television, computer, iPhone, iPod, handheld games. And for some children with social anxiety and children with other anxiety problems, these things start to crowd out other activities. They crowd out reading a book, and extremely worrisome, they can crowd out contact with other children. So some of the children with social anxiety will refuse or be reluctant or really prefer to play games, television, computer. One of the challenges and risks for parents is that the computer or the television can be a pretty good babysitter and keeps the child engaged. And if you don't watch it, it can kind of get out of hand, and the child uses it to avoid social interactions. And then when they're missing social interactions, they're missing opportunities to be involved with other children, learn social skills, build up their confidence. With most of the families we see, we talk about the parents really taking charge and controlling how much screen time their children have each day, and making sure that the parents are in charge of the devices rather than the children.
Parents play such an important role, far more important than any psychologist, in helping any child overcome their anxiety, and particularly younger kids, because it's all about how we structure the environment. In our home, do we encourage brave behavior where we face our fears, or do we have reinforcement of avoidance behaviors? So something that parents will do, for example, is talk out loud a lot to each other about their own worries. And they may not have full-blown anxiety disorders, but everyone has daily hassles and stress, right? And so one parent will say to the other parent, oh, my boss really wants me to go on behalf of the company to that cocktail party, but I won't know anyone and I really don't want to go, and gosh, I don't have anything to wear. I'm just going to tell him that we're going out of town that weekend. And that's an example of modeling out loud avoidance behavior. Then when our little one really doesn't want to go to a birthday party and we agree to make up an excuse for that, we're also modeling avoidance behavior. And by keeping them home, the second we tell a child that they don't have to go do something they don't want to, they instantly feel relieved. And unfortunately, escaping something that's hard becomes paired in the mind's eye with feeling relief. And then it's very hard to go backwards and untie those two. And that's what we have to do. We have to pair doing the brave thing with the good self-esteem nuggets, as I call them, that children get afterwards. And the way that we do that is by taking step-by-step approaches instead of all or nothing, all in approaches to dealing with fears. So that the child who doesn't want to go to the sleepover birthday of a friend in grade 4 maybe can go to the first 2 hours of the birthday party. That's much better than not going at all. Now, it's hard to do this as a parent. And even myself as a child psychologist finds it very difficult to see my own child very distressed, which he certainly has been many times in the past. And I want to give in and I want to rescue. So it's helpful in that way to go and talk to someone like a child psychologist, because they'll kind of give us the backup and support to be able to do what needs doing.
Facing fears and overcoming anxiety is something that takes time. It's important to practice all the different skills that we've talked about today, and it's important also to have patience with the children that we're working with and also with ourselves. While all of these tips and ideas can be very helpful, sometimes it can be important to seek professional help. Two common approaches to helping children deal with anxiety are looking at medications that can be helpful, or seeking someone who can deliver cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy is an approach to anxiety that gets a person to look at their thoughts about their worries and their fears, as well as their behaviors of avoidance, and also looks at ways that they can learn to calm their body reactions to anxiety. It's important to remember that problems with anxiety aren't solved overnight. However, there are lots of resources out there to help children and the adults who care for them overcome their struggles with anxiety.